The architecture of the Middle East did not merely crack tonight, it shattered. While the mainstream media remains fixated on the optics of diplomacy and the hollow choreography of press briefings, the brutal truth is written in the movement of uranium and the high-frequency vibration of enrichment centrifuges. The world we knew yesterday, defined by strategic ambiguity and the slow, grinding machinery of international oversight, has been vaporized by a single announcement from the White House. History is not turning a page. It is closing the book on the old order. We are witnessing the demolition of the post-Cold War security framework in real time. The pillars of global stability, predictability, deterrence, and the sanctity of borders have been replaced by a landscape of fire and steel. This is the existential reckoning that the analysts warned about, but the bureaucrats ignored. Phase 1, the uranium receipt and the physics of the end. The official narrative from Washington is presented as a triumph of peace through strength, but the technical reality is far more terrifying. For anyone who understands the mathematics of nuclear proliferation, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has confirmed that Iran has signaled its intent to hand over its entire stockpile of enriched uranium. This is the crown jewel of the Iranian defense architecture, a resource bought with 4 decades of crushing sanctions, domestic suffering, and the blood of its scientists. This isn't just a political concession. It is a total strategic surrender of the regime's ultimate insurance policy. Donald Trump has drawn a line in the sand, a red line that does not move, does not blink, and does not negotiate. 440.9, say that number out loud. This is the number of kilograms of 60% enriched uranium currently sitting in Iranian vaults, according to the most recent International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, reports. If you understand the physics of the fuel cycle, you understand the horror of that figure. 60% is not a peaceful level, it is the tactical threshold. From 60% to 90% weapons-grade material is a mathematical leap, not a marathon. It can be achieved in a matter of days within a cascade of IR-6 centrifuges. That 440.9 kilograms represents enough material for 10 nuclear warheads, 10 cities, 10 existential reckonings. The breakout time has effectively dropped to 0. The United States is not asking for a reduction or a temporary freeze. It is demanding an absolute obliteration of the Iranian nuclear capability. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, has issued an ultimatum that carries the physical weight of a carrier strike group parked in the Gulf of Oman. Tehran must surrender every gram, every canister of UF6, and every blueprint. Hegseth has explicitly refused to rule out the use of Special Operations Forces, Tier 1 operators, to physically seize the material from the hardened facilities at Fordow and Natanz. This is the language of hard power, unambiguous, cold, and final. There is no room for the strategic patience of the previous decade. The toolkit of the 21st century has been stripped down to its most kinetic components. Phase 2, the ceasefire mirage and the Strait of Hormuz chokehold. The 2-week ceasefire currently in place is not a peace treaty. It is an operational window. It is a tactical pause designed to allow the Iranian leadership to contemplate the total destruction of their state apparatus. Washington has stopped the kinetic strikes, and Tehran has reopened the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical energy artery. But do not be deceived by the temporary silence of the batteries. This is a stress test for the structural integrity of the Iranian regime's resolve. The silence is not peace. It is the holding of a collective breath before the next detonation. James David Vance has made the terms of this arrangement crystal clear. If the Strait of Hormuz closes for even a second, if a single mine is detected in the shipping lanes, the ceasefire ends instantly. There are no second chances in this matrix of choices. The United States is providing a diplomatic exit ramp, but it is paved with the threat of total military annihilation. This is strategic paralysis forced upon the leadership in Tehran. They are caught between the humiliation of surrender and the certainty of a decapitation strike that would wipe out the IRGC leadership in a single afternoon. But the Iranian side is already pointing to the cracks in the foundation. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, has cited 3 specific violations of the 10-point proposal. He claims the framework is already hollow, a Trojan horse for American intervention. He points to the intrusion of an unmanned aerial vehicle over the city of Lar in Fars province. One drone, one violation of sovereign airspace is enough to collapse the entire diplomatic house of cards. The receipts of these violations are being documented by Tehran as justification for a potential return to hostilities. They are testing the edges of the cage. Phase 3, Operation Eternal Shadow and the Dahiya Doctrine. While the diplomats talk in Islamabad, the missiles are falling in Lebanon. Only hours after the ceasefire was announced, Israel launched Operation Eternal Shadow. This was not a localized skirmish or a tit-for-tat exchange. This was a saturation strike. 100 high-value targets neutralized in 10 minutes. This is the qualitative military edge in its most brutal and efficient form. The Israeli Air Force utilized the F-35I ADR, a stealth platform that renders the aging S-30 batteries completely obsolete. The Lebanese Ministry of Health reports over 250 dead and more than 800 wounded. These are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They represent the total breakdown of the regional security architecture. The strikes hit the heart of Beirut during the peak of human activity, targeting the financial hubs and communication nodes of Hezbollah. No warnings, no roof knocking, no delays. Only the sound of incoming precision-guided munitions and the thick, acrid smell of cordite. This is the application of the Dahiya Doctrine, the use of disproportionate force against civilian military dual use infrastructure to ensure long-term deterrence. The strategic disconnect here is staggering. Donald Trump views Lebanon as a separate theater, a distinct conflict that does not fall under the umbrella of the 2-week pause. Caroline Leavitt reaffirmed this stance, effectively giving Israel a green light to continue its demolition of the northern front. Tehran, however, sees this as a fundamental betrayal of the ceasefire's spirit. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has warned that the ceasefire cannot survive while the Lebanese front burns. He is right, but his leverage is evaporating. The proxies that Iran spent 40 years building are being systematically dismantled, while the mothership in Tehran is forced to watch in silence, paralyzed by the threat of the American War Cabinet. Phase 4, the economic hemorrhage and the California death spiral. The cost of this conflict is not just measured in blood and rubble in the Levant. It is measured in the price of gasoline in California. The Golden State is currently the victim of a mathematical asymmetry that is crushing the middle class. 75% of the crude oil used by California is imported. 1/3 of that comes directly from the Middle East, specifically through the Strait of Hormuz. When the strait is threatened, California begins to bleed economically. The state's energy isolation is no longer a theoretical vulnerability. It is a daily reality for millions. The receipts are devastating. Gas prices in California have surged to $5.93 per gallon, $1.75 higher than the national average. This is the price of geopolitical instability. The state's energy infrastructure is a relic of a globalized era that is rapidly disappearing. Without the steady flow of fuel, the economy faces a total shutdown. The green energy transition has left the state without the traditional refining capacity to handle domestic crude, creating a bottleneck of the soul that Tehran is more than happy to exploit. South Korea is currently holding 26 massive vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. These are the lifeblood of the global supply chain, paralyzed by the threat of Iranian anti-ship missiles and suicide drones. President Yoon Suk Yeol is scrambling to provide low-interest loans to logistics firms, but you cannot solve a kinetic problem with financial instruments. You cannot pay a missile not to fire. When the tankers stop moving, the world stops spinning. The just-in-time delivery model of global capitalism is being replaced by just-in-case hoarding, driving inflation to levels not seen since the 1970s. Phase 5. The global dominoes and the fortress economy. The ripples of this crisis are reaching the shores of Indonesia and the halls of the Kremlin. President Prabowo Subianto has called an emergency session to pivot the Indonesian economy toward total energy and self-reliance. He is looking at cassava and corn to fuel his nation, a desperate return to agrarian energy sources. This is the ultimate subtext of the current era, the death of the globalized energy market and the birth of the fortress economy. Nations are realizing that interdependence is just another word for vulnerability. In Europe, the ghost of history has returned with a vengeance. Maria Zakharova, the voice of the Russian Foreign Ministry, has issued a chilling warning to Berlin. Germany is rearming at a pace not seen in 80 years. They are aiming for a military force of 260,000 men. They are restricting the movement of men aged 17 to 45, preparing for a state of defense. Zakharova's message is clear. The last time Germany sought to be the dominant military power in Europe, the world burned. The Zeitenwende is no longer a slogan. It is a mobilization. Even in South America, the pressure is mounting. Gustavo Petro is bypassing the Colombian Congress to implement emergency economic decrees. He is fighting to save the standard of living of his people from the inflationary firestorm. This is the reality of the 2025 world order. A single spark in Isfahan creates a conflagration in Bogota. The interconnectedness that was once hailed as a bringer of peace has become a conductor for chaos. The world is breaking into regional blocks, each one sharpening its knives and reinforcing its borders. Phase 6. The digital frontline and the AI insurgency. While the missiles fly and the tankers sit idle, a different kind of war is being fought in the shadows of the internet. Cambodia has just enacted a draconian new law to combat technological fraud. 5 chapters, 24 articles, life imprisonment for those who use artificial intelligence to destabilize the social order or spread strategic misinformation. This is the realization that a line of code can be as destructive as a bomb. In an age of deepfakes and algorithmic warfare, the truth is the first casualty. The Islamabad summit on April 11th is the final pivot point. Vice President James David Vance, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner are heading into the heart of Pakistan to meet face-to-face with the Iranian leadership. This is the ultimate high-stakes gamble. This delegation does not consist of traditional diplomats. It consists of deal makers and warriors. They are not going there to discuss human rights or climate change. They are going there to collect the uranium. If they find a path forward, the world breathes for another month. If they fail, the 2-week window slams shut, and the full weight of the American military toolkit will be unleashed. Stay sharp. The official narratives will tell you that the ceasefire is the beginning of a new era of peace. The data tells a different story. The data tells us that we are in the eye of the storm. The uranium is still there, hidden in deep mountain facilities. The missiles are still in their silos, pre-programmed with coordinates in Tel Aviv and Riyadh. The red lines are still drawn in blood. In this game of geopolitical chess, the next move will determine the fate of the 21st century. There are no grandmasters left, only survivors. Phase 7. The infrastructure of survival and the death of Songkran. In Thailand, the reality of the energy crisis has forced a return to state-mandated austerity. And Nutan Charnvirakul is telling his people to work from home and save every watt of electricity. The Songkran festival, usually a riot of water, light, and celebration, is being shadowed by the rising cost of aviation fuel and the total disruption of global travel. This is how the end of the old world looks. Not a sudden bang, but a slow, grinding decline in the quality of daily life. The middle class is being vaporized by the cost of living. The South Korean government is desperately trying to secure the safety of its 26 stranded ships. These vessels are the physical manifestation of the global economy's fragility. President Yoon Suk-yeol's meetings with logistics leaders highlight the desperation of a nation that has everything to lose and no military path to victory. They are dependent on a fraying ceasefire. If those ships are seized or sunk, the South Korean one will collapse, and with it, the stability of the entire Pacific Rim. The Islamabad talks will be hosted by Shehbaz Sharif. Pakistan has the religious ties to Tehran and the strategic minerals that Washington craves. It is a country where both sides feel they can speak without a gun to their heads. But even Sharif's credibility is on the line as the Lebanese front continues to bleed. He is hosting a summit in a house that is already on fire. Phase 8, the final accounting and the Isfahan fortress. The International Atomic Energy Agency's estimate of 440.9 kilograms of uranium is more than a technical measurement. It is a countdown. Every day that passes without a confirmed handover is a day closer to the point of no return. Rafael Grossi has identified the tunnel complex at Isfahan as the likely storage site. This is the fortress that must be cracked either by ink or by steel. The mathematical asymmetry of the facility's depth versus the penetration capability of American bunker busters is the only calculation that matters. The domestic political pressure on Donald Trump is immense. He has claimed a historic victory, but a victory without the physical possession of the uranium is a hollow one. The ceasefire is his leverage, but leverage has a shelf life. As the 2-week clock ticks down toward April 11th, the tension in the Situation Room will become unbearable. The world is watching to see if the negotiator-in-chief can close the deal of the century, or if he will be forced to authorize the most significant military operation since 2003. Iran's response has been one of defiance masked as cooperation. Fatemeh Mohajirani, the government spokesperson, insists that their missile systems remain on high alert and fully operational. They claim the Strait of Hormuz is their sovereign responsibility and theirs alone. This is not the language of a defeated nation. It is the language of a regional power. They are betting that the cost of war, the $6 gas in California, and the global energy crash will force Washington to blink first. They are playing a game of chicken with the global economy. Phase 9, the strategic breakdown and the humanitarian ledger. The 10-point plan, once hailed as a breakthrough, is now a bone of contention. Tehran claims the right to peaceful enrichment. Washington claims that any level of enrichment is a non-starter. This is the fundamental contradiction that has plagued diplomacy for 20 years, now compressed into a 14-day window. The bridge phrases used by diplomats are failing to span the chasm of distrust. There is no middle ground when it comes to the atom. You either have the capability or you do not. In the streets of Beirut, the silence between the Israeli explosions is filled with the sound of thousands of displaced people seeking shelter. 1.2 million people have been forced from their homes. This is the human cost of the strategic window. While the elites negotiate in Islamabad, the ground level is a landscape of rubble, dust, and despair. The Lebanese Ministry of Social Affairs calls it a dangerous turning point. But for those living under the flight paths of the F-35s, the turn has already been made. The social fabric of Lebanon is being shredded, creating a vacuum that will be filled by even more radical elements. The European Union's call for a suspension of the agreement with Israel is a sign. Spain's Pedro Sanchez is using words like unacceptable and crimes against international law. But words do not stop missiles, and they certainly do not stop the Israeli Security Cabinet. The qualitative military edge of the Israeli Air Force is indifferent to the resolutions of the European Parliament. The power architecture is centered in the flight paths of the munitions and the bunkers of Isfahan. Phase 10, the energy fortress and the death of governance. Indonesia's pivot to biofuel and domestic coal is a blueprint for the future of the global South. President Prabowo is not waiting. He is building a fortress Indonesia fueled by cassava, corn, and coal. This is the ultimate self-reliance. It is a recognition that the globalized world is a luxury that can no longer be afforded. When the energy bloodlines are cut, you either produce your own or you perish. The green agenda is being pushed aside by the survival agenda. In Colombia, the economic emergency is a desperate attempt to shield the population from the global shockwaves. Gustavo Petro's readiness to rule by decree is a symptom of the death of traditional governance. When the world is on fire, the processes of democracy are seen as a liability by those in power. We are moving toward a world of emergency states where the rule of law is secondary. The Islamabad summit on April 11th will be the final receipt. If Vance and Arakshi can find a way to reconcile the irreconcilable, the 2-week ceasefire might become a permanent peace. But the history of the last 40 days suggests otherwise. The patterns of violation, the rhetoric of total victory, and the hard reality of the uranium all point toward a different conclusion. The strategic paralysis of the West is meeting the existential defiance of the East. Phase 11, the German question and the return of the great power. The re-emergence of German military ambition is perhaps the most overlooked domino in this global collapse. Berlin is fundamentally altering its societal structure to prepare for a hot war. The requirement for men to seek government permission before leaving the country is a move straight out of the 1940s. It is a signal that the European peace is dead. Germany is realizing that it must be able to defend itself, and that realization is sending shivers through the halls of the Kremlin. Maria Zakharova's invocation of the Second World War is not just rhetoric. It is a strategic reminder of the volatility of the European heartland. If Germany becomes the leading military power in Europe, again, the entire balance of the continent shifts. The focus is on Iran, but the foundation of Europe is cracking simultaneously. The Zeitenwende is the end of the post-war German identity. The pacifist giant is waking up. The military spending increase of over 23% in a single year is a staggering figure. It tells us that Berlin expects a kinetic conflict on its doorstep within 36 months. They are preparing for a high-intensity, peer-to-peer war in the Suwalki Gap or the Baltics. Every major power is retreating into its own fortress, sharpening its own steel, and preparing for the long night. Phase 12, the final countdown, and the Islamabad chessboard. As we approach the Islamabad summit, the role of Pakistan becomes the ultimate wild card. Shehbaz Sharif has bet his nation's future on being the mediator. But mediation requires both sides to be willing to lose something significant. Trump wants the uranium, all of it. Iran wants its sovereignty and its enrichment rights, all of them. These are mutually exclusive desires. The presence of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in the delegation suggests that the deal-making will be unconventional, transactional, and brutal. They look at the world as a series of leverage points. Can you buy off a revolutionary regime that sees its nuclear program as its only guarantee against regime change? The receipts from the last 40 years suggest the answer is no. The final hours of the ceasefire will be the most dangerous period in human history since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Both sides will be tempted to make a move to improve their leverage. A drone strike, a cyber attack, or a surgical strike. Any one of these could be the spark that turns the Islamabad summit into a post-mortem for the Middle East. Phase 13, the satellite silence and the shadow war. While the world focuses on the visible movements of troops, a silent war is being fought in low Earth orbit. Surveillance satellites from both sides are being blinded by ground-based lasers and electronic warfare suites. The operational window is becoming opaque. This is the satellite silence, the precursor to a massive kinetic event. In the bunkers of Nebraska and the hardened command centers of the IRGC, the nuclear football and its Iranian equivalent are being prepped. This isn't theater. It is the logical conclusion. If the Islamabad summit fails, the transition from diplomacy to total war will happen in milliseconds. The speed of modern warfare means that the decision-making window has shrunk to almost nothing. Phase 14, the severed tentacles and the proxy collapse. The destruction of Hezbollah's command structure in Lebanon is more than a tactical victory. It is the severing of the tentacles for the Iranian octopus. Without Hezbollah to threaten Israel's northern border, Iran is exposed. Its qualitative military edge has been proven to be a myth when faced with the combined intelligence and air power of the alliance. This collapse is creating a panic within the axis of resistance, from the Houthis in Yemen to the militias in Iraq. The realization is sinking in. The mothership cannot protect them. As the proxies collapse, the pressure on the Iranian leadership to use their ultimate weapon, the 440.9 kilograms of uranium, becomes almost irresistible. Phase 15, the final choice, the atom or the table. We are now at the precipice. The Islamabad summit is not just a meeting. It is a trial for the future of human civilization. The choice is binary: surrender or start a regional war. Stay sharp. Do not be lulled by the 2-week silence or the optimistic headlines. The numbers are clear, the missiles are in their racks, and the clock is ticking toward April 11th. This is the existential reckoning. History is being written in the dark, in the enrichment halls of Isfahan and the situation rooms of Washington. Only those paying attention will survive. The end of the script is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning of the next phase, a phase defined by hard power, self-reliance, and the austerity of survival. Whether it is called peace or total war depends on the next 72 hours. But regardless of the name, the reality will be the same. A world transformed by fire and steel. Keep your eyes on the Strait. Keep your eyes on the uranium. Keep your eyes on the German mobilization. The world you knew is gone. Stay sharp. The reckoning is here.